is a code. Let's discuss. Chairman of the American Conservative Union, Matt Schlapp, and Tim O'Brien, executive editor of Bloomberg View and author of Trump Nation, The Art of Being the Donald. Brother Schlapp, do you believe the president should seriously consider getting rid of Bob Mueller, a man who was lionized by Republicans just a couple of weeks ago, now being somewhat savaged?
No, not at all. Not with knowing what I know. He's simply putting his team together. He's looking over the information that Jim Comey has given him, and we ought to let him do his job. And besides that, I think Rod Rosenstein, the #2 at Trump's DOJ, has said, unlike Peter Fitzgerald, a previous special counsel who was also a U.S. attorney, Bob Mueller is not a U.S. attorney, is picked as a special counsel, and is in a little bit of a protected class for that reason.
Good. All right. Other headline that we're seeing this morning. Tim, you've been talking about this a little bit, but now you have some new fodder. You have the tapes. You have a take on why Trump is playing with us about whether or not he has tapes of tape conversations. I want to hear about that. But you see the travel ban tweet as code as well. What is he expressing in that travel ban?
I think it's his lack of either understanding or respect for checks and balances, and it's in keeping with a long tradition with Trump of taking pot shots at the judiciary and law enforcement officials. And I think he's got a powerful perch, but he's yet to show that he understands he should use it in a more judicious way.
You've been involved in litigation with him in the past. The threat/suggestion of tapes of the conversations came up in that litigation as a way of pushing you back a little bit. What happened there?
I was a reporter at the New York Times at the time. I was reporting on him there. I then wrote a book about him. He sued me for the book. He sued me for libel for Trump Nation. And during the course of the reporting, for probably well over a year, we were in regular contact. And sometimes during telephone conversations, he'd finish off the conversation by saying, "You don't mind if I'm taping this, do you?" And I would say, no, that's fine. Or I'd be in his office, and he'd say, "You don't mind if I turn on my taping system, do you?" I'd say no, on and on. So then when the litigation rolled around, we wanted access to his tapes because we thought that the tapes would reflect well on our side of the conversation. So he was asked under a deposition, "Have you taped Mr. O'Brien?" And he said, "No, I haven't. Actually, I don't have a taping system." And my lawyer said, "Well, then why did you say this to him?" And he basically said, "I wanted to intimidate him. I thought it would make him nervous." And I think that's exactly what's going on with Jim Comey. I don't think Trump has tapes. I think he's probably unnerved by the fact that Comey kept a record of their conversations, and he wants to put this red herring out there that he has tapes, which I don't think exist.
Matt Schlapp, what do you make of this tactic of not answering the question about whether or not tapes exist? There's somewhat of an imposed deadline for this Friday, but what do you make of this?
I don't know. I guess, Chris, there's so much happening with Jeff Sessions testifying and everything else. I think we should talk about tapes if he ever shows any tapes. Everyone I talk to who were, people I worked with in the White House or others tell me the chances of any tapes, they just can't imagine that there are any tapes. I do think Donald Trump has had to forego so much leaking from the executive branch in an unprecedented way that I think everyone's a little spooked on when something is taped, when there's a deposition. Even people who have been doing this a long time wonder, with all the new technology and our digital devices, what actually does get taped. So I think we should cover it when and if they're exposed, and if not, let's talk about something that's going on.
Right, but what about the tactic of intentionally not saying whether or not there are tapes?
But what about the tactic of what James Comey did, where he said, "It's the first time I ever wrote down an account with a president," and I went on Twitter last night and read another account of his interaction with George W. Bush, which had to come from Jim Comey. It was eerily similar. He talked about the grandfather's clock. He talked about trying to slip out that door by the grandfather clock. It's like, there's so many problems with Jim Comey. I can see why it's unnerving for the White House.
A law enforcement official making a record of a conversation isn't a tactic. It's good law enforcement.
Well, then why did he say it was the only time he's ever done it when it was also in the book The Angler, where his one-on-one account with George W. Bush was written about? Now that, Matt, to me, is a problem.
All right, that's your opinion. It's fine for you to have it.
No, it's a book. It's not my opinion.
I'm saying, based on what you read in the book, this is your opinion about whether or not he was being truthful about saying he's never done this before. What I'm saying is
maybe he forgot.
Why is that the answer to the question that I asked, which is, what do you make of the tactic of pretending that there are tapes and stringing it out for over a week when you are the White House and the President of the United States? Do you bless that tactic?
What I bless and don't bless doesn't matter. I think
does. You're on my show, and I'm asking your opinion as someone who's relevant.
Okay, Chris, if there are no tapes to talk about the potential presence of tapes, as I said to Allison yesterday, it doesn't make sense to me. I think it's a failed tactic. But that being said, I don't know until he says definitively, yes, there are, or no, there aren't. He says he's going to tell us next week. And until that happens, all I can tell you is the people I talked to say the chances of tapes are next to zero, if not zero. And I just think he feels snake bit by Jim Comey, and I don't blame him.
Listen, I get where you're coming from. I'm just saying, you have to police tactics, because what happens when it's about whether or not he's going to tell people if they're getting tax relief in a certain class, and he says, I'll tell you next week. So you want to police these tactics. But Matt Schlapp, you matter, my brother. That's why I have you on the show.
Thanks,
Your
Chris.
opinion matters. Timothy Bryan, value added as always. Thank you for being with us.